There we go. All right, let me grab my coffee. We're going to get started. Time. Nice looking guitar.
God told Moses, the Midianites, the Midianites were from Abraham's second wife. So they were Jewish too.
All right. We are making our way through 1 Kings. And tonight we're trying something a little different, actually. We're going to be, this little camera here is instantly putting this all up on YouTube. So we're trying to be a little bit better at cataloging this stuff. And so we'll just have it here, and if you want to at some point, go for it. Otherwise, maybe someone's going to be looking at 1 Kings and want to check it out. So we left off in 1 Kings. Actually, it's correct up here, 9 verse 6. And so let me open us up with prayer, and then we're going to jump into this because there's a lot of stuff in here that we see, and this is kind of really where we begin to see kind of the end for Solomon. It's coming, and there'll be little clues. We got one more high note, and then it's pretty much over. So we're almost there. Let me pray, and then we'll start. God, I thank you for this evening and for all that you want to do as we study your word. Pray that as we continue to go through it just verse by verse and line by line, that you would show us things that we need to hear, show us things that we need to be thinking about. And so, God, I pray that that you would help us to understand the text better, that you would help us to be a people that, even though we're reading this and it's an interesting story, we recognize that there was a purpose for this, and there were things that you want your people to hear. And so we pray these things in your name, Jesus. Amen. So let me start off with some passages we'll look at that are from the Torah or the Pentateuch. And the first one will be Leviticus 26, and that's going to be 27 is where we'll start there. And then if we might also go over and look at Deuteronomy 28, 36 through 37. So let me read some of these to you. I want you to have this in the back of your mind as we look at these next set of verses here. So the first one, Leviticus 26, beginning over in verse 27. Here's what it says. Once my pages are there. It says this, and if in spite of this you do not obey me, this is God speaking to Israel, if you do not obey me but act with hostility toward me, I will act with furious hostility towards you. I will also discipline you 7 times for your sins. You'll eat the flesh of your sons, you'll eat the flesh of your daughters, I'll destroy your high places, cut down your shrines, and heap your lifeless bodies on the lifeless bodies of your idols. I will reject you. I'll reduce your cities to ruin and devastate your sanctuaries. I will not smell the pleasing aroma of your sacrifices. I also will devastate the land so that your enemies who come to live there will be appalled by it. But I will scatter you among the nations, and I will draw a sword to chase after you, so your land will become desolate and your cities will become ruins. And the land will make up for its Sabbath years during the time it lies desolate, while you're in the land of your enemies. And at the time the land will rest and make up for its Sabbaths. As long as it lies desolate, it will have rest, the rest it did not have during your Sabbaths when you live there. And I'll put anxiety in the hearts of those of you who survive in the lands of their enemies. The sound of the wind-driven leaf will drive them to flight, and they'll flee as one flees from a sword, and fall through as no one is pursuing them. They'll stumble over one another as if fleeing from a sword, though no one is pursuing them. You'll not be able to stand against your enemies. You'll perish among the nations. The land of your enemies will devour you. Those who survive in the lands of their enemies will waste away because of their iniquity, and they will also waste away because of their fathers' iniquities along theirs. And then it goes on to say, but when they confess their iniquity, the iniquity of their fathers, their unfaithfulness that they practice against me, and how they acted with hostility toward me, and I acted with hostility toward them and brought them in the land of their enemies. And when their uncircumcised hearts are humbled, and when they make amends for their iniquity, then I will also remember my covenant with Jacob. I'll remember my covenant with Isaac, my covenant with Abraham, and I'll remember the land. For the land abandoned by them will make up for its Sabbaths by lying desolate without the people, while they make amends for their iniquity, because they rejected my ordinances and abhorred my statutes. Yet in spite of this, while they're in the land of their enemies, I will not reject or abhor them, so as to destroy them, or break my covenant with them, since I am the Lord their God. For their sake I will remember the covenant with their fathers, whom I brought out of the land of Egypt, in the sight of the nations, to be their God. I am the Lord. So he gives this pretty grim picture of what's going to happen if Israel decides, and this is before they ever even enter into the land. It tells them, if you go there and you decide that you're going to follow after other gods, and you're going to reject me, just know that this is what's going to happen. It's pretty terrible, the things that he talks about that's going to happen to them. And in fact, all of that does take place. I mean, it gets so bad in Israel that they end up, when for instance, they talk about how they're eating each other. That does take place. It gets to the point where they wall up their city to keep the enemies out, and the enemies just kind of starves them out. And what do? You find out that people just decide that they're going to resort to cannibalism and try to hold out, and so then that happens. And then, of course, they get expelled and moved off into the land. But you notice in that, God has said, you're going to reject me, fine. And here's what's going to happen. He tells them way ahead of time. Moses is telling the people through the Lord that this is how it's going to play out if you decide to go down this route. I'll give you two more verses, and that's the passage in Deuteronomy. I want you to hear this before we hear the words given to Solomon. So we'll look at Deuteronomy 28. And here's what it says. Deuteronomy 28, verse 36. The Lord will bring you and your king that you have appointed to a nation neither you nor your fathers have known. And there you will worship other gods of wood and stone. And you'll become an object of horror and scorn and ridicule among the peoples where the Lord will drive you. And so, right off the bat, we have known since the very beginning, before they ever went into the land, we've already known since the time God even pulled them out of Egypt that this was not an easy people to lead. In fact, they were always prone to leave God. And so before they even got there, Moses has already told them what the Lord has said, which is, here's how this is going to play out. We already know what's going to happen to you. So that's in mind, right? So here we have now this incredible king. He is, at this point, has expanded the borders of the kingdom. He is the son of David. He has built the temple. And up to this point, it appears that he kind of thinks he might be the fulfillment of this promise that God has given him, which is, David, I'm going to have a descendant after you who'll build a house for me, and he's going to reign forever. And so Solomon kind of thinks that this could be him. And then we get these words when God visits Solomon a second time. And so we pick up, and we remember that beginning in verse 4, I'll start with verse 4, and then we'll go back to 6. Then we'll go to 6. In chapter 9, it says this: As for you, if you walk before me as your father David walked, with a heart of integrity, and in what is right, doing everything I've commanded you, and if you keep my statutes and my ordinances, I'll establish your royal throne over Israel forever. As I promised your father David, you will never fail to have a man on the throne of Israel. So he's saying, Solomon, I'm giving you a shot. Giving you a shot to get this right. But what we're going to find now is the negative side of this. And I think God is telling Solomon, look, this is not new. We've always known. You have a shot. Don't go down this road. And here's what he tells him. He says, if you or your sons turn away from following me and do not keep my commands and my statutes that I've set before you, and if you go and serve other gods and bow down and worship to them, I will cut off Israel from the land that I gave them. And I will reject the temple that I have sanctified for my name. And Israel will become an object of scorn and ridicule among all the peoples. let me stop for just a moment. Let me ask you, when you hear a phrase like cut off, what do you think that's speaking of? Anybody have any ideas? When he says, I'm going to cut you off. So he says, I'm going to cut you off. You think he's saying, I'm going to bless you?
No, he's going to cut off the blessing.
He's going to cut off the blessing. Okay.
Think of like an inheritance.
Okay.
Like, you're cut off. Yeah.
You've been cut out of the will.
Out of the will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what we think about. The term actually really has to do with the idea of being rejected and excluded from fellowship with God. When you're cut off, you are excommunicated, so to speak. You know, last Sunday we talked about, as Paul says, I've handed these ones over to Satan, so they'll be taught not to blaspheme. They're out. And so we have this kind of similar image that if you go down this road, it's over. You're not part of this anymore. You're excluded from the people. You're excluded from being able to approach me and to have this relationship that we have right now. And so that's what he tells him. He says, you're cut off. You be cut off. And he says, and I will reject the temple. I'm not even gonna look at this temple anymore. I'm not gonna. That's not gonna be something that I care about if you go down this route. And he's very serious. Don't go. Thank you, beautiful lady. Don't go down this road of following after other gods. I don't know if I've talked with you about this before, but this is a real. For some reason, we look at this. Anybody ever think, what's the big deal with the temptation to follow other gods? You look at this right now. I mean, how many of us in here, if I said, don't go following after other gods or idols, how many of you would say, well, Pastor, I know that's a real struggle for me right now? Not many of us would claim that that's really a big deal. And it's hard sometimes when we read this text to say, what's the big deal with these people? But Jim, do you have an answer? You have something you want to speak into that?
I go through that every once in a while when I start reading through Leviticus.
Mm-hmm.
When they worship other gods, all they have to do is pray or whatever guidelines they have.
Yeah.
But when you look at all of the things that God asks them to do, in sacrificing, in cleansing, if a person touches a dead person, they're out of the camp for 7 days.
Yeah.
When I look at all those things, I say, my gosh, I could never do that.
Yeah.
But it depends upon how willingly you want to cling to the Lord.
Yeah.
And the same thing applies now to us.
Yeah. I think there's something to it. I think one of the points is you can't do that. I think that's one of the reasons why, as we read the Torah, we're supposed to look and say, who could actually do this? But I think there's something else. I think not only would they look and say, this is a hard thing to try to keep up with. And if they go that route, of course, they've turned it into something legalistic. I can't keep doing all of this. And that the point would be that they would drive themselves to say, you're right, that I need to recognize what God has done for me. I need to recognize that the whole point of this is that He is providing a way for me to come to Him. But I'm not good enough on my own. I think there's a piece of that. But here's the other side. You don't see Israel just saying, like today, we talk about, in our culture today, we talk about the rise of the nones, the Nones, which is people who are just simply apathetic to faith in general. That they left, probably like, high church, they've left, kind of what mainstream, or not mainstream, like, the big kind of Protestant churches of the day. And now they don't claim to be atheists. They just claim to be nothing. I'm not really anything anymore. We don't see that with Israel. We see a draw for them to always go towards other gods. We don't see them just say, I'm nothing anymore. There's an enticement. Yes, Kate?
Well, I think when people are saying they're nothing, they're really saying they themselves want to be their own God. I think there's an enticement. It's just not called another God. It's just that we can be our own God.
We make it up because a lot of people, I've talked to my college students yesterday about this. A kind of a phrase that's thrown around a lot too is, the universe does this for me. Or, that we kind of like, it's almost like the universe is the one calling the shots. And we've just replaced God with universe because I'm not accountable to a universe. I'm accountable to a God, but not a universe. Here's my thoughts on this, though, is God has constantly told them, don't go down this route. And even in the face of seeing how God has worked miracles for them, even during the Exodus, there is always this draw towards something else. And I think there's two things going on here. I think, first off, there's a real darkness that's involved with the worship of other gods. I don't think it's simply there's an idol that just sits there and has no real, any real draw to it. I think there is a dark spiritual force that draws them there. I don't have time to get into this tonight, but maybe I will at some point about what is going on behind these faiths, what's going on behind these idols. Paul, I believe it's in 1 Corinthians, talks about how they sacrifice to idols. He says, but they don't realize they're sacrificing to demons. And that gives us a little bit of insight that there's something going on that's much more than let's just make an idol of stone and think about how this could help us better. I think there's something real that draws them to this, something that the darkness can probably provide them, maybe some immediate kind of feeling of satisfaction or some immediate feeling of I can get this taken care of if I go down this route, and all I got to do is say a few prayers or involve myself in this instead of having to go through kind of the rituals that we see here. Yeah, Bill?
Didn't they also involve a lot of sexual immorality?
Oh, yeah.
As a part of the worship?
Yeah, so when you start looking at the Ashtoreths.
Right, so it's always fertility.
Uh-huh.
Right? People would say, hey.
You're saying I pay a few dollars, I get with a prostitute, and that's part of worship? Sign me up. That's kind of the mindset of what a lot of the people were too. And so I think there's two of that. I think that's the other side of it too, is there is such an enticement towards the physical, the fleshly side. So I think there's a dark spiritual piece of that, and I think there's also just that fleshly appeal. Yeah.
No accountability.
Exactly. Because you just go do your thing, and then you go off and live the way you want. And what we're going to see, and here's what we're going to, is hold on, because within about a chapter and a half, you're about to see how all of this is introduced back into Israel again. And who it comes from should be pretty shocking to see. But this is what it is. It was real. There was real enticement that drew them away, and I think there was something very dark. And that's why God has constantly been saying, don't go down this road, because it was something that it was not just this kind of, why would you go do that? No, there's a real temptation to do this. And God told them over and over not to, and to trust that God was sufficient. Don't go down to the harvest God because everybody else is doing what they need to do to get the harvest God to take. Trust that God's going to take care of you through that. Yes, Susan.
Think about today. I look at it today. The devil has a way of basically being able to help us to practice suicide, material, money.
I think you have other idols in them too, and you place other little things there. We wouldn't call it that, but it's the same concept. It is. It's the same concept.
And rather than blaming demons all the time, the book of James talks about us being enticed by our own sin.
Yeah. So I think there's two things. Like I said, I think there's a big part of that, but there's a real. I think the devil is making a big play for Israel to pull them away from God and to pull them towards something else. I think I have a lecture that I go through of who are the gods of the Old Testament, and meaning that who are the gods behind when the Exodus takes place? That God says, I've made judgment against their gods. What does that mean? What's he talking about? And so I think there's something to that. I think so there's a whole little thing about that. I think there's a dark strategy behind nations to pull people away from God. And that's part of it. But there's also the fleshly appeal, which is just, that's my enticement, and he knows how to get them. And I think we'll see, with one particular individual, I think that's the foothold that leads into more of the darkness. That way, it's just simply a fleshly draw that takes them there. I don't think he started out by saying, I'm going to worship all of these gods. It starts with, I like doing these things, and then they get sucked into that world. So let's look at the next set of verses here. He says, I'll reject the temple. He goes, Israel will become an object of scorn and ridicule among the peoples. That's exactly what the Torah said, that people are going to start shaking their heads and say, these poor, pathetic people couldn't get it right. Look, they were destroyed. God's already told them, this is everything was already known before since the Torah. Though the temple is now exalted, verse 8, everyone who passes by will be appalled and will scoff. And they will say, why did the Lord do this to this land and the temple? Verse 9. And they will say, because they abandoned the Lord their God who brought their ancestors out of the land of Egypt. And they held on to other gods and vowed and worshipped to them and served them. Because of this, the Lord brought all this ruin on them. And so it's very clear. All he's doing is he's giving them a reminder of what was already spoken of in the Torah. That if they go down this route, here's how it's going to play. Now, I brought up this question, I think, last week, which was, as Solomon, you might say, why are you going to say, I just did the temple for you? What are you saying? You think I can fall? And I think God is saying, yeah, you can fall big time. And God is saying, I know that this is how you can, but I'm giving you, I've visited you again to give you another shot to don't go down this route. Now, here's how it goes to. Now, here's something that we begin to start seeing a little bit more of the cracks here. So we find verse 10. Now, at the end of 20 years, during which Solomon had built the two houses, the Lord's temple and the royal palace. Remember, one of the weird things was the temple takes 7 years, but it takes 13 to build Solomon's majestic temple. That was always kind of an interesting piece. But 20 years after, he's midway through his reign at this point. It says, King Hiram of Tyre, which is modern-day Lebanon, it says, having supplied him with cedar and cypress logs and gold for his every wish, King Solomon gave him, Hiram, 20 towns in the land of Galilee. So it seems like the initial agreement where Solomon was going to be paying Hiram in olive oil and in some of those other things, feeding them and supplying a lot of that food, he's gone above and beyond at this point. And so as a result, Solomon gives him 20 towns in the Galilee area, the northern part of Israel. I love how this goes. Look at this. So Hiram went out from Tyre to look over the towns that Solomon had given him, but he was not pleased with them. And he said, what are these towns that you've given me, my brother? And so he called them the land of Kabul. And they're still called that today. What that essentially translates to is it's the land of good for nothing. Solomon felt slighted here. Hiram did. He said, I've given you all this stuff, and you're going to give me 20 dumpy towns. He goes, I don't want these towns. In fact, and then it says he called them that, and then verse 14, Hiram had sent the king 9,000 pounds of gold, and so what you actually will find out is he ends up kind of giving them back. You see that in 2 Chronicles 8:2, that Hiram essentially said, I'm not taking this. And so you see that story and you think, okay, what's up with that? Because you've had this really strong relationship between the two, and it almost might kind of make you realize, what was Solomon trying to pull something a little bit? You've given me a lot, I'm going to give you 20 dumpy little towns. And so Hiram says, I don't want these things. Yeah, Bill?
Does he have the right to give away this promised land?
He owns it all. I think so. I think he can give cities, because really the point is they have the land. Even, one of the things you look at too, the point initially is they've been given it, and then God says, I'm not going to give it all to you up front because you got to work it. That's a great question. Can he do that? And can he give those pieces? Anything right here to say that was bad, but what we do see is that they were pretty worthless in terms of what he gave him. But yeah, you're looking at that and you're saying, well, that's strange. Why is he carving out his territory? But it does appear that this is a strong relationship. Hiram, we don't know where he's at spiritually. We just know that God had gotten a hold of him. But yeah, Bill, that's an interesting question to bring up, which is, by Solomon giving up cities, is that something also to look at, that he is carving up something he's not really allowed to? Very good question. I don't know how to answer that, but it's a good one to think about. What we do know is it's obviously listed here as something that has gone wrong in the relationship. And so it might be, maybe that's one of the reasons. Maybe God's telling him, you're not giving that away, and that's why Hiram says, I don't like these. That God says, no, you're not going to like these towns because you're not able to give that away. But those get taken, a lot of this stuff gets taken pretty quickly after things go pretty badly in Israel. And God just says, I'm going to take that, I'm going to take that as well. And at the end of it, it's a tiny piece of land. I mean, this is the height, by the way, of the kingdom. It is never this big ever again. It never gets to this. And even when they get back in, there's never this full understanding that we're going to take all of this back. It's by that time, it's just we're back in the land. And so having that peace is significant. But yeah, this is it. This is about as good as it gets. And I think that's an interesting insight to say, here we are, and he's already trying to carve a little piece out. And a big chunks are about to get carved out soon enough.
Already a lot of erosion of character.
Yeah.
And he feels twice as nice a place for himself as he did for God.
Yeah.
That's wrong.
And then willing to give stuff up, give own cities up, That's a great insight there. I'm gonna keep that shelved away for another time too. Now notice this. Verse 15. It says, now this is the account of the forced labor that Solomon had imposed to build the Lord's temple, his own palace, and the supporting terraces, the wall of Jerusalem, and Hazor, Megiddo, and Gezer. So this is usually, when it talks about forced labor, are the peoples that as they conquered areas, especially David was the one who did that, those people would be put into forced labor. Those other nations, instead of being killed off, you have the option of being able to work and to work and just build stuff and stay alive. And so those are them. These supporting terraces, it's kind of debated what they are, but obviously it's a big undertaking because these are some of these big projects that he's doing. Look at what he's doing. He's got all these cities, and he's talking about these supporting terraces as well. And so it appears our best kind of understanding what this is probably kind of expanding and filling in some of the gaps in Jerusalem. It's all built on hills and kind of trying to flatten things out to make more area to place things in Jerusalem. This is kind of a building out of Jerusalem is what's been taking place here. And so notice what else it says. Pharaoh, king of Egypt, had attacked and captured Gezer. Now, Gezer is about 18 miles northwest of Jerusalem, and he burned it, killed the Canaanites who lived in the city, and gave it as a dowry to his daughter, Solomon's wife. Now, once again, you're just reminded that he's got this woman with him. And but Pharaoh comes up, takes that Canaanite city out, and gives that to Solomon for his marriage. Then Solomon rebuilt Gezer, Lower Beth Horon, which is this is an area that would have been in the south. That was a city was strategic for protecting the area of Judah. And then it said Bala, and Bala and Tamar in the wilderness of Judah, all the storage cities that belonged to Solomon, the chariot cities, the cavalry cities, and whatever Solomon desired to build in Jerusalem, Lebanon, or anywhere else in the land of his dominion. So there's just a reminder that he has this massive forced labor. And we do remember, too, that early on we find out that the Israelites, you've got a set of them this is what they do. They have temporary service that they still have to do. It's going to become a point of contention later on, that there's all these building projects going on, and Solomon just keeps working the people. Granted that the people of Israel were never enslaved, but the Canaanites were, and the people outside who were serving them were. But notice all these things he's got. He's got all these massive cities. He's got all these massive undertakings. It is interesting today, if you were to look at this, they've done excavations in these areas, and they'll find that these cities especially, they've seen, all have similar building characteristics. And they all tie to this era, this Solomonic era. And so it's interesting, as they dig, they're starting to know, okay, this city, looks like this was built in the similar style as this city. And so it's kind of interesting now we're actually able to go back and to look at the ruins of these cities and recognize that there's probably a common builder. And we're able to say, well yeah, because that's what it says. That Solomon came and he rebuilt these ones at this time. So notice what it says now, verse 20. For all the peoples who remained of the Amorites, the Hethites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, who were not Israelites, their descendants who remained in the land after them, those whom Israelites were unable to completely destroy, Solomon imposed forced labor on them, and it still is this way today. Now that's a clue to that this is something much later than Solomon, but this process is still going on. These people, instead of being wiped out, they were absorbed into the people, but they're a working people. They're a people that are there to serve the Israelites, is what they're doing. But Solomon did not consign the Israelites to slavery. They were soldiers, his servants, his commanders, his captains, his commanders of his chariots, and his cavalry. These were the deputies who were over Solomon's work, 550 who supervised the people doing the work. So we were just reminded once again, the Israelites had a separate thing, but he did put them to work. They were just in shifts. You'd go out for 3 months and then you'd be back for a time. Then you'd go out again and you'd be back. And that's what's happening here. Now, here we go. Look a little bit more. Verse 24. Pharaoh's daughter. Now, they always talk about this is Pharaoh's daughter. Don't give her a name. I think it's to remind us that this is somebody who is not an Israelite. She doesn't belong. God says, don't go back down to Egypt to get your horses, but yet he's gotten a wife from Egypt. So here is Pharaoh's daughter, moved from the city of David to the house that Solomon had built for her. Then he built the terraces. So we find that there's this new palace that's been built for her. He finally moves her out of the city and puts her in this new palace that he had built for her. And then we have these terraces, and it appears that these are probably built to kind of expand the city and to make sure that where the new house is, it's all included in the boundaries of the city, and where you've got your walls and things like that. But it's interesting if you read, and let me just go there. You don't need to go there. 2 Chronicles 8 gives us a little insight. I want you to listen closely to what it says with her being moved. Catch this. 2 Chronicles chapter 8, verse 11 says this. Solomon brought the daughter of Pharaoh from the city of David to the house he built for her. For he said, my wife must not live in the house of King David of Israel, because the places the ark of the Lord has come into are holy. He moves her, and he has kept her away because he recognizes ritual purity. I can't have this woman near these places. So that's another thing that you just say, that's weird, isn't it? But here you are, you have the man who is the spiritual leader of Israel, the leader of Israel who's supposed to have all this wisdom, and yet now he's got this wife who he has to build a separate palace for so that she does not ritually defile any of the places that are holy in the city. He's had to do this for you. So that's just a little interesting insight here that he built. This pagan queen has to have some special considerations for her. So once again, you need to read, as we read this, the writer of Kings is not telling us, and this was really bad. And this is what we are to read, is we're supposed to kind of know in the back of our minds, we're supposed to be familiar with the stories from the Torah about the prohibitions, and to say, hey, all of us know this is pretty messed up, and soon enough, he's going to finally deliver the blow. But right now, we're just looking at that and saying, isn't that weird that it's happening that way? It's like, when you know that things are wrong, but you can't put your finger on it yet, you just know that seems kind of off, and then eventually it all just comes out. And this is what we're seeing here. It's all going to come out at some point, come to light, but it just starts, and it's just a little off right now. Now, King Solomon put together a fleet of ships at Ezion-Geber, which is near Eloth on the shore of the Red Sea in the land of Edom. With the fleet, Hiram sent his servants, experienced seamen, along with Solomon's servants. And they went to Ophir and acquired gold there, 16 tons, and delivered it to Solomon. Now, what we find is we find that. Did I skip 25, by the way?
Yeah.
Sorry, I love verse 25. It's not like I just wanted to skip over. Let me go back to 25 and go. 3 times a year Solomon offered burnt offerings and fellowship offerings on the altar he built for the Lord, and he burned incense with them in the Lord's presence. And so that's just probably talking about the 3 times a year that a Hebrew male was supposed to be present for the big feast day. So those are going to be the things like the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the Feast of Weeks, the Feast of Booths. And so it's talking like he's participating in the big ones that everyone has to do. That's all that's saying. So he continues this practice. Now we get on to the next piece, which is that we do see that him and Lebanon, him and Hiram, still have an alliance. Now remember, David was buddies with him, and it appears that God has inclined the heart of this Lebanese king to be towards Israel, to bless them and to help them out. And so we find that, and one of the things about the Lebanese is they are, at this time, the Phoenician people, they're experienced boatsmen. They're known for their ports. They're known for their ability to do ships. And so what we find is Israel and Lebanon have teamed up here, and here they are. They're having Solomon gives them access to their ports, and they're going to come down and they're going to man the ships and they're going to go on these expeditions to go get gold. Now I find something really interesting about this passage, because does anybody have a different translation about the location of the name of the sea? Anybody have a different name for it? It all says Red Sea, right? Okay, it's in the land of Edom, and that's Jordan area. And so, but here's what's interesting about this, okay? I find this peculiar because in the story of the Exodus, the name of the sea that they cross is called the Sea of Reeds. It's called Yom Suf is what it is. That's the name of it, Yom Suf, the Sea of Reeds. So a lot of people, when they read the Exodus story, will say, see, these people, they could not have possibly crossed the Red Sea. When they say the Sea of Reeds, probably here's what's happened. This is the storyline. Because what a lot of people do is they want to read as much of the miracles out as you can, because they can't fathom that God could have done these things. So they say, see, they says Yom Suf. It says the Sea of Reeds. And so they say, so here's what it probably was. It probably was more of a marshy, kind of swampy area up in the part of Egypt that when they came, this heavily reeded area in the water, they came across and they were able to cross pretty easily, and they retold it as this miracle. But there's a couple things wrong with that. First off, the idea of a big swamp kind of being separate, how that works, but then also this place, Yom Suf. So people will say, no, see, it's not called the Red Sea. They don't call it that. You can't say it's the Red Sea. But here's what's really interesting. Here's what I love about this passage. The original name in this passage right here, where the port is that they're going out, bringing in all these tons of gold, the actual name in verse 26 is, it's the Sea of Reeds. How do you sail on a swamp and get that much gold somewhere in the middle of Egypt somewhere? So this is one of the reasons why we translate it now as Red Sea, because it's not. But it's telling us, the biblical writer is telling us, this is the same place. It's the same sea that Moses crossed through. It's the same place that the people are now getting in, and the Lebanese are having to come through Israel to dock there in the Red Sea, and then get in those ships and now sail to go find gold. So I think that's an incredible reference that helps us understand the people of Israel didn't just anticlimactically walk through a swamp and then just say, oh, we walked through and had this incredible miracle. The writer is telling us this is the same location. So much so that you have a fleet of Lebanese and Israelites going through, and they're on this huge expedition to get gold. Yeah.
How did the swamp swallow up the soldiers?
Exactly. Who knows? It's just It's whatever. It's whatever to try to make it unmiraculous. But I've always kind of, you always think, Sea of Reeds. Okay, why? And then you look and say, they call it the same thing here. It's the same location that takes place. And I believe that there are some reference, I don't know off the top of my head where that is, that Solomon actually, tradition Solomon marked it where that took place. But this would be over, and here's our best guess, is this is over in the Red Sea somewhere. And I could do my maps for you. It's been a while since I've done this. But here we are. Here, of course, is Cyprus here. And then this is the Red Sea here. And this would be up here, kind of the Galilee area. And then you've got here. And then this is Jordan River, Dead Sea here. And then you've got the Red Sea. So it seems like what they're doing is they're coming across. And they're in this port right here, and they're going to cross over, and they're going to go on this expedition to this area. Now, here's what we don't know as we read this. But we do know it's the same sea that the Israelites crossed through. That's what we do know. Here's what we don't know. None of us really know where Ophir is. We don't know where that is anymore. There's a couple different speculations about where this place is. Some suggest that it's just Arabia. Now the problem is this is Arabia right here. It seems kind of like, why do you really need to have this big expedition to just go here? And it's really not that far of a trip. Really, why don't you just go like that? You don't really. So there's that piece too. So it doesn't seem that it's Arabia. Some say it could be East Africa. Because, of course, if you follow the Red Sea, you drop down, it gets bigger, and then eventually it opens up, and there you are. And so some say, well, they took this and they went off to East Africa. Some speculate that it's in India. And one of the reasons why is you'll find out in chapter 10 that when they're going, first off, verse 22 tells us a lot more of what they're finding. They're there, and it says that it takes them once every 3 years. It's a 3-year journey to do this. So they'll do all that they're doing to collect all that they're collecting, and it tells us what they would come with. Gold, silver, ivory, apes, and peacocks. They're going somewhere pretty exotic. Some of the wood, by the way, that we find out as well is one of those ones that kind of makes us think that it could have been India area. So it appears that they're going a pretty far way to this location that would have been rich in gold and rich in, I don't know why anyone would want apes to bring back, by the way, because I've had a monkey growing up as a kid. I don't know why anybody wants those things as pets, but for some reason, they probably did it the first time through and they didn't do that again after that. They said first 3 years, this was fine. We're not doing this again. Let's just stick with gold from now on. But if you have a chance, if you're to look, and I'm trying to see, I don't know how many of y'all see in here, and I was going to throw this up on the screen to be able to show you what that would have looked like. I'll stop it for just a minute, and I'll see if I can throw it up on the screen just to show you what the trip could have looked like. I'll cancel this. I'll stop here for now. I did want you to look at the location because there is a person that's going to come up next too.